thanks to my own incompetence. So it's all going to be a surprise. So my surprise is as follows. I mean, obviously this session was, I think, has the most one of the most eclectic titles of any sessions I've ever had to speak at. Macroeconomic policy development, changing world work and gender. I think, well, how am I going to talk about all of those things in 15 minutes? So I may fail. And of course within the context of the social preconditions for the commons. So I'm not going to try and hit all of those elements, but I think I will discuss something that I think is of relevance to all of those. And in my opinion is definitely a precondition for social commons. But it's also something that brings a lot of challenges in terms of our work on this issue, and that is the importance of internationalism, international solidarity, and North-South justice to commons-based approaches. And to begin, I want to begin by giving a bit of background about Global Justice Now, my organisation, and kind of what we're working on, and sort of where we come from in relation to this issue. At the moment we're working on developing the idea of creating a new internationalism. So I suppose rejecting the more sort of nativist reactions to neoliberal globalization and to come up with global solidaristic solutions. And one of the areas within that framework which we work is migration. And we take on the issue of migration a very strong anti-border stance. We believe that immigration controls are essentially a form of apartheid on a global scale. It's a sort of caste system whereby somebody born in one place has superior rights and is free to travel, where somebody born in another location who is exactly the same does not have those rights. And we believe that this is perhaps the injustice of this century, in the same way that slavery was injustice for previous, and racism, obviously both of those things are still with us. Were the big injustices that came to the attention of the left in previous centuries. And this is we believe that this is the borders essentially support neoliberalism as well, because without borders, the whole structure whereby a small, slightly more privileged section of the world is basically bribed to support neoliberalism at the expense of the vast majority, the entire system collapses. Now, we are both pro-commons and anti-borders and pro-internationalists. Now that to most of you in this room will not seem like a contradiction, I hope. But to many people in the wider world, that is much more challenging as a question. When you say these sort of arguments in wider society, especially in the global north, one of the first reactions, especially to give the example of the UK context, is when I say we need open borders, we need to have a more humane migration policy for people from the global south, their reaction is say goodbye to the welfare state. The National Health Service in the UK will become an international health service, and we can't afford this. You cannot reconcile a welfare state and, by extension, commons-centred approaches to social protection and internationalism and open borders. You can either choose to have borders and welfare, or you can choose to have an internationalist approach and no welfare. And that is an argument which in wider society, it's a lie, but in wider society has a lot of credence. Now, as I said, it is a lie which has some basis in truth, in that it is true that neoliberalism works on the basis that of welfare being a sort of way to preserve the privilege and the support of a section of workers in the global north at the expense of those in the global south. Because of course, if we didn't have the welfare state in the north, then and it's why the welfare state in the century has been tolerated for so long until the 1980s, and only now being destroyed because it was conceived as a way of preserving neoliberal, preserving capitalism itself. And there are two main reactions to this problem of the commons and internationalism on the left. And the first reaction is to pander to this sentiment. People look at the rise of Donald Trump, Duterte, Modi, Brexit, and all of these nativist movements, and they say, well, we have to choose between the commons and internationalism, and we choose the commons. You know, they see workers turning against internationalism and say, well, and there are not as many workers that are turning against internationalism as these people will argue, but it's true that there is a subsection of them which have. And you know, that in order to get out of the situation, the left has to embrace nationalism. You know, try and expand and protect welfare, but do this at the expense of outsiders, at the expense of foreigners, at the expense of people in the global south, if you are talking from a global north context. So essentially to achieve greater commons for the privileged in the north at the expense of those who are outside. Now, there's the second approach, as you'll probably guess, which includes me, is arguing for the opposite. Arguing not for less internationalism, but for more. For more international solidarity, for radical commoning of wealth on a global scale. Now, that sounds very good, but why and how, I suppose, is the major question. And I'll start with the why. Why? Because there's no point in the commons without internationalism. The entire idea is defeated without it. If we are sitting in this room to help secure equal access to resources for a small and exclusive and privileged group, then I'm sorry, but I'm sitting in the wrong room. I know I'm not, so I'm happy. You know, I think Sandy yesterday actually came up with I don't know if you came up with it actually, but it was a phrase that definitely hit me. The idea of the global north being enclave economies. You know, economies that are based on the exclusion of others to ensure their privilege. And I think, you know, that's very, to me, the idea of a commons that is limited to the global north, that is nationalistic, is something that will perpetuate that system of international north-south injustice. And I think yesterday also I had a very interesting conversation with Chantal and Francine, actually you as well, Sandra, about like you could have a commons theoretically. There's no theoretical you could theoretically have a commons of fascists, essentially. You could have a commons of the very rich. Commons is not something which is, by its very nature, intrinsically a leftist idea. It is thankfully predominantly being that in practice, but it is completely possible, philosophically and theoretically, to have a commons based on exclusion, based on privilege, based on sort of the elite club model of the commons. And that is something that if we are truly progressives and we are truly leftists, we must reject. You know, and this view of the commons is compatible with, I would say, fascism. You know, I was a couple of weeks ago, Steve Bannon, who is obviously Trump's ideologue, far-right ideologue, came to the UK and gave an interview to the BBC. And a lot of the stuff he was saying, you know, we must destroy capitalism. You know, the workers must be given more rights. You know, defend the welfare. I mean, I've heard these things from the left. There are moments I thought, there are parts of the left, they're very close to this position. And that is a very dangerous place to be. Which is why, for us, the commons has to be completely meaningless for us as a progressive left, unless it comes with broader social and economic equality. Left nationalism fails on so many levels to provide these things. If achieving a commons-based society comes at the expense of throwing people in the global south under the bus, comes at the expense of throwing climate change under the bus, if it comes at the expense of throwing gender equality under the bus, I'm sorry, but I reject the cultural relativism of some of those people on the nationalist left. I want to destroy the patriarchy as much as Saudi Arabia or India or Barcelona or the UK or Washington DC. It has to be an internationalist struggle. It cannot be a national, culturally specific struggle. Left nationalism fails all of these tests. Okay, well I've made the moral case, but now about how? How do we fight the left nationalist case? Well, we talked yesterday, I think, about the commons having to be specific, and that is where the kernel of the truth is. You know, there are some commons, and commons is a very, you know, it's a complex idea, right? I mean, there are some commons which are international by their very nature, like the internet is a commons which is international, borderless by its very nature. So that's very easy. But obviously there are some specific resources which are geographically located. and are finite. So we cannot open these, if we have a global commons of everything, this doesn't work unless you have broader social and economic equality. But it doesn't have to be exclusive. These communities, access to the commons does not come as a birthright, but by virtue of your accidental birth in one particular location. It can come as a result of membership in a solidaristic community. And those solidaristic communities can change. People can move, people can integrate, people can people can move and integrate and be in different communities. And this does not have to be an exclusive nationalist concept that presides purely on the national nation-state level. There can be local commons, there can be national commons, sure, there can be global commons, there can be regional commons, and there can be virtual commons. Different resources can be commons on different levels. And I think, I'm not going to go into all of that, because I think that was covered very well yesterday by some of the speakers. And of course there are ways in which we can come around we can circumvent some of the problems in the short term by some of the principles of mutuality, which I think you were talking about just now, and some of the speakers yesterday were too, and that sort of idea of mutual help and mutual solidarity, mutual contributions, those things are community-based and can be residency-based and non-citizenship-based. But in the long term, we can't get away from the vital truth. But if commons is to have meaning, it has to come with north-south equality in economic terms and in social terms. Just as we believe in the right of humans to move, and we also need to believe in the right of humans not to move, and to stay and to achieve economic equality where they currently live. Neoliberalism, poverty, war, climate change, all of these side effects of the current economic system we live in are forcing people to migrate, are forcing people to chase higher wages and better living conditions. And that is a side effect of the broader economic system in which we live. And the answer to all these problems is unfortunately that commoning has to come alongside a much broader change in the global economic system. We need to common global wealth itself. And this is a massive topic, obviously, but I will try and make it slightly more achievable, or make it sound a little bit more, less of a monster and more something we can really fight for, by illustrating it with one example in particular, of how global commoning of wealth itself can work. I'll give an example of international aid from the global north to the global south. Now, throughout the last generation or so, we've seen an evolution of how we view aid from north to south. It started off, obviously, with this idea of charity, that aid is a charitable gift from the rich to the poor. And we at the left have always been very sceptical of this idea, and we have instead been arguing for these transfers to be rethought of as reparations to countries that have been victims of colonization, victims of economic imperialism, and so forth. But I'm going to argue for a further evolution of that idea. The idea which fits in much closer with the idea of commoning global wealth itself. And that is to see international aid as another form, one form among many potentially, of wealth redistribution and wealth as an international commons. Because once we get past the reparations level, we are still left with huge economic inequality. And if we see, just as within nation states and within regions we have wealth redistribution through tax from rich to poor, there is no reason why we can't see aid and international development assistance in that same light, as part of a way to redistribute wealth from the global north to the global south. And by doing this, we are taking baby steps towards creating a global demos, and a global community, an internationalist solution, an internationalist approach to the commons. So, in sum, I've only got a little bit of time left, so I have to skip some of the detail here. I would beseech us all, and I think I'll have a lot of agreement in this room, but we need to go beyond this room and make the argument more broadly on the left, that we must reject the left nationalist temptation. We must not follow Trump and Duterte, who in the Philippines, some was even talking about he's talking about himself as the first leftist president. I mean, this is the kind of situation we're in. We reject the Brexit, we reject the red-brown alliance of those who believe that we have to fall back on nationalism and nativism in order to defend the commons. We can only win by staying true to the principles of our movement, by staying true to the principles of North-South justice, by fighting for climate justice globally, for fighting for gender equality globally, for fighting for economic equality globally. Commons for the rich is not commons at all. Thank you very much.